Howdy, this is Jim Rutt, and this is The Jim Rutt Show. Listeners have asked us to provide pointers to some of the resources we talk about on the show. We now have links to books and articles referenced in recent podcasts that are available on our website. We also offer full transcripts. Go to jimruttshow.com. That's jimruttshow.com. This is the third of 4 of my pre-U.S. presidential election episodes where I interview heterodox thinkers, people not wedded to either party, on their thoughts on the election and more. The first 2 were with Cliff Maloney and Brett Weinstein, both of which were interesting conversations. Today's guest is Richard Hanania. He has a PhD in political science from UCLA and a law degree from the University of Chicago. He is currently president of the Center for the Study of Partisanship and Ideology, which supports and funds research on how ideology and government policy contribute to scientific, technological, and social progress. Welcome, Richard.
Thank you for having me, Jim. Glad to be here.
Yeah, I think this should be an interesting conversation. I really got to know Richard's thinking, at least, what of it I have seen so far, by subscribing to his Substack, where I am a paid subscriber, one of the 18 or so I actually pay for. I've got another 35 or so that I free ride on. And I by no means agree with him about everything. I do find him to be a refreshingly heterodox thinker who actually thinks about the issues and doesn't just glom on to tribe red or tribe blue. And he also uses some quite careful analysis and some colorful language. As regular listeners to the podcast know, I like both careful analysis and colorful language. So Richard is just the kind of guy I was looking for this series.
I don't know, colorful language sounds like I curse a lot or something. I don't. I sometimes have a sort of informal tone.
And vivid examples, things like that.
Yeah, I do that. Yeah. When you say heterodox, I actually do have an article on the Substack called "Please Don't Call Me Heterodox." So it's fine.
Well, you're heterodox anyway. Fuck you, right?
Yeah. As it happens, I found that what I argued in the piece is that it often becomes an identity. People become just reflectively whatever people are saying. They have to say the opposite, and there sort of becomes a heterodox orthodoxy. So I just like to be a guy who takes unpopular positions when I think they're right and, takes popular mainstream positions. People shouldn't be afraid to sometimes do that too.
Yeah, I would describe myself the same way. I call myself heterodox, but I just try to get to the straight shit either way, right?
Yeah.
And as far as cursing goes, I'm famous for it. Some of my fans call me Salty Jim. Right? I even did a podcast on the history of the F word one time. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I got to find that.
So his Substack's worth checking out at Richard Hanania, and then he also has a Twitter feed at the same handle. He also has a recent book out, The Origins of Woke, which I have bought, but I have not read yet. Well, before we hop in, there is one item of disclosure. As regular listeners know, I'm always trying to disclose things if I think they might or might not be relevant, but for the listeners to make their own decisions. Richard's got a little bit of a controversial past. Apparently, he was a kind of an alt-right troll under a pseudonym back in the old days, and there was a disclosure article in the Huffington Post in 2023 titled, "Richard Hanania, Rising Right-Wing Star, Wrote for White Supremacist Sites Under Pseudonym." You can get all the gory details there. I never heard of Richard Hosta, not interested in Richard Hosta. Richard Hanania has apologized for those posts and represents himself today as a small L liberal. We're going to proceed on that basis.
Sounds good.
All right. So, 2020 election. Don't give quite the punchline yet who you're going to vote for, but you've written quite a bit that's quite negative about both Team Red and Team Blue. Why don't you take a shot at Team Red first?
Okay, yeah, excellent way to structure the conversation. So yes, I believe that the flaws that the media points to in Trump and his Democratic opponents point to are correct. I take the conventional, this is why I'm not heterodox in the sense that people usually think of the term, because I think there was a coup attempt in 2020. He does deny the results of elections. He openly says he doesn't believe in. I mean, he says, I would win California if Jesus counted the ballots. I mean, the man is just not even pretending. I mean, it's sort of crazy to see his supporters who are like, oh, they're trying to sane wash what he says. He's just openly saying, I should win all 50 states and I'm going to reject anything, anything that's short of that. I mean, so it's so clear that this is what he does. This is bad. This is something that we should not tolerate. I think that the Republican position on abortion, I'm pro-choice. And so over the years, this has been something since the Dobbs decision came out in 2022 that has hurt Republicans a lot. And I think for good reason. I think most Americans want government out of these reproductive decisions. I think there's a lot of conspiracy thinking. A lot of this is downstream of Trump, but a lot of it is also just sort of organic. There was this, just to take one example. I mean, there's a story about a guy who just posted an anonymous thing that, Microsoft Word document that claimed to be from an ABC News whistleblower, a completely anonymous account, zero evidence. It got retweeted by Marjorie Taylor Greene. Megyn Kelly, covered it. She said, we don't know if it's true or not, but there was nothing there. I mean, there was to make it to the level of conservative media, to have something that's literally based on nothing is quite incredible. And so, yeah, there's this sort of conspiratorial mindset. There's the reproductive issues, and then there's the just the Trump cult and the election denial. I mean, if you're going to make an indictment of the Republicans, from my perspective, those would be the core of it.
And how about the negatives for you on Team Blue?
Yeah, I just don't agree with them on policy. I mean, as people will learn, or if they know already, I believe in small government. I think we should have free markets and labor. I think we should have, that reminds me, by the way, I forgot Republicans. Trump just hates trade. I mean, I still stick to the position that free trade is a good thing. Trump wants 10% tariffs, which I don't think will happen, but this is another strike against him and his current, the current Republican nominee. And so, yeah, I think Democrats are in general the anti-market party. They want labor unions that can tell businesses what to do, tell people who can hire and who they can't hire. The longshoremen strike recently that your listeners may have followed. Basically, their demand was we couldn't have technology. America has some of the least efficient ports in the world. And the union's position is, look, if they become more efficient, if we have technology, we're going to lose our jobs. And Kamala came down on the side of, not on the side of that specifically, but on the side of the longshoremen. Trump was just quiet about it. But generally, Democrats are going to be the ones who are more in bed with the labor unions. They're going to want higher taxes. They are going to be bad in many ways on free speech. I think there's civil rights. There's civil rights law you could actually matters, and this is what my book is about. It has implications for free speech issues on university campuses. So I think a Republican administration will make this somewhat better. A Democratic administration will make this somewhat worse. Although we don't have COVID restrictions anymore, I think that the Republican approach of Operation Warp Speed, which Democrats doubted, but now it's unpopular in Republican circles. So it's hard to say whether that's a plus for Republicans or Democrats, because Republicans did it, but now Democrats think it's a good thing and Republicans think the vaccine is a bad thing. But I'm still sort of...
I think that's quite hilarious, actually.
Yeah. And so I still think the Democrats, putting aside the vaccine issue, they masked children. I mean, for 2 years out here in California, the school closures, just disastrous policies. And so, yeah, that's the core of the Democratic, most issues I just simply disagree with them on. Foreign policy, I think they have a bad approach to the Middle East. I mean, I think they should be more supportive of Israel. I mean, a lot of people don't like them for being too supportive of Israel, but I think that they're trying to micromanage the war. I think that there's nothing good that can come out of that. And we should be an ally. I mean, Israel is on our side. It's morally right. It was attacked. And the Democrats are sort of moving away from that position.
All right. Yeah, that's sounds like familiar talking points, kind of things, not identical to my own views, but similar. Let me run through the rut criticism. Start with the Democratic Party, since you did the Democratic Party left, and then we'll go back to the blue. One of my biggest objections to Democrats is they are the party of oikiophobia. Now, that's a $10 word, but it carries 10 tons of weight. And it's basically that the left, particularly through education, has been indoctrinating our young people to hate our culture. You can look at poll results that show that the number of kids in their 20s who express patriotism is way down. One of my favorite ones is we look at those people who say that Jews are oppressors, unqualified, not talking about Israel. 9% for us boomers, something like 65% for people under 25. So hatred of America, hatred of the West, and hatred of the Enlightenment is a unfortunate big part of Team Blue's agenda. Regular listeners know I hate the woke ideology, which I now call neo-tribal racism. I think the affirmative action in college admissions was a huge scandal. It also shows how elite-driven the Democrats were. 75% of Americans, including every ethnic group, were opposed to that policy, but nonetheless, we had it for 50 years. And then for Team Blue, some, not all, but some really extreme climate change proposals. For instance, Bernie, in his 2020 platform, claimed that he would have 100% renewable energy for transportation and electrical generation, 100% by 2030. Totally nuts. I used to say only Stalin could do that. And then a friend of mine who's an expert in alt energy said, nah, Stalin couldn't even have pulled it off. Only guy who could have pulled it off was Pol Pot, killed 25% of the people and dropped the GDP by 80%.
There would be no energy use, right? Because that's why energy use would be a fraction of what it was. So you can maybe get 100% renewable that way.
Exactly. And that thing is still up on the web. At least it was a month ago. Bernie, hundreds of millions of dollars, probably would have won if there hadn't been a conspiracy to stop him. He was making literally an insane claim on climate change. Of course, the Dems have always been the party of spend, spend, spend. I'm a gun rights guy. I don't like their Second Amendment approach. I'm a free speech guy. I don't like their political correct-driven free speech stuff, particularly on college campuses. I find their support for Hamas, and it's not all of them, but there's a wing of the Dems. Hamas lovers do not like that. So there's quite a long list of things I don't like about the Dems. With respect to the Republicans, number one, or close to it, is their religious extremism. I used to be a Goldwater Republican way back yonder, up till 1992. We won the Cold War. I said, no more nuts, right? Republicans always had a fair number of religious nuts and other sorts. But since about 1992, that percentage of the Republican Party has gone up and up and up. And now we even have a non-trivial number of Christian nationalists that more or less align with the Republican Party. I hate that. Along with you, I strongly disagree with their abortion and other social issues that include the drug war. And also Republicans are very opposed to the right to die, which strikes me as cultural imperialism. And in most cases, these are driven by religious values and opposed to individual liberty. While the Dems, some of them, grossly overreact on climate, the Republicans underreact on climate. Vivek said, it's a hoax. That's bullshit. Anybody who knows the science knows that if you increase the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere, the amount of retained energy will increase. Now, what that exactly means in terms of ramifications, it's unknown, but lots of simulations and models. And something's going to happen, and it's probably not good. The exact rate we're not sure of, how much we should mitigate, how much we should cut, how much we should geoengineer. Those are open issues, but smart people can think through. And both parties are too far away from the logical trajectory to get us through to the other side. Fiscal irresponsibility, while the Dems are spend, 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 the Republicans are now spend, 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 very slightly less, and then cut taxes a huge amount so that the deficits actually grow more rapidly these days amongst Republicans than they do amongst Democrats. It's useful to remember that the last time the budget was balanced was under Bill Clinton, and that was the first time and only time it's been balanced in 65 years. Also, the foreign policy naivete of the Republicans is a strong thread. Vance is a fine example where he has some scary ideas about Ukraine and Taiwan, right? I personally believe that if we don't stop the authoritarians like we've done in the past, the authoritarians are going to continue to gain ground. And then my biggest issue with the Republicans is Donald Trump is a fucking piece of shit. I was fortunate in my business career to have met many of the tech CEOs of my generation, the boomers. And there were a few of them famous for their narcissism. You probably could guess who they might be. I've spent hours with them. None of them hold a candle to Trump. I refer to his narcissism as all galactic. And people who think he's a fascist, no. He's a fascist only if it's convenient to pump up his narcissism. And that's very dangerous because it basically means that Trump whisperers like Putin, etc., can play upon his narcissism by praising him, kissing up, etc. And they have an inordinate ability to actually manipulate him. He's also a pathological liar, if liar is what the right word is. And maybe he doesn't even understand the concept of truth. As far as he's concerned, the purpose of words is to say what is ever convenient and useful in the short term. During the Biden-Trump debate, which certainly Biden melted down, but Trump probably had the third or fourth worst debate session in modern history. And I gave up counting at the number of just obvious lies, just things that were just on the face, not true. And anybody who followed politics would know. I think the commentariat totaled up 55 or something. I noticed at least 30. So he just lies all the time. And he's also, due to his sort of meanness and cheating and all that, his business people, he doesn't pay them, declared bankruptcy at least 4 times, maybe it's 6. And as I said in 2015, when he first came on the scene, said, I wouldn't hire that guy to run the mailroom at one of my companies. Why in hell would I hire him to be president of the United States? So that's sort of how I come out as a double hater. So now let's go to the other side. What do you like about the two parties?
Okay. So Republicans, I like the fact that they're doing school choice on the state level. I have an article on that they're basically giving resources to parents rather than to public educators. I like the tax cuts. I like the Republican states are doing very well. I have an article called 40 Years of Economic Freedom Winning, and I show that there's been 40 years of basically GDP growth and population growth where the red states are outperforming the blue states. And I don't think that's an accident. I think they have good, on the whole, more sensible policies on things like labor, on things like taxes, on things like, even crime and things like that. The foreign policy, I think Trump was his success in the Middle East, I think is still underrated by a lot. There was relative peace in the region. Israel worked out peace deals with the UAE. The one that they were working on with Sudan, one with Morocco. These were historically important accomplishments. They were moving toward the Saudi deal too. And, the general idea that you should regulate less and you should cut red tape. I think Operation Warp Speed was a great example of that. You mentioned Vance has some isolationist foreign policy views. That's not that reflected within Congress yet. On Ukraine a little bit. Yeah, on Ukraine, they make it a little bit difficult. But Trump, it brags about getting aid over the finishing line for Ukraine. And on the Middle East, and I think on China too, the Republican Party is generally still tougher than most Democrats are. And so, yeah, it's pretty much the majority. I think we were sort of outliers. The red states were outliers on freedom, and not just in the U.S., but in the developed world, and even the third world. There was really nasty lockdowns and mask mandates for a really long time. And Republicans had a little bit of that at the beginning, but then they moved away from it pretty quickly, and that's unquestionably to their credit.
All right. One of the things you have written about quite a bit is your views on religion, particularly with respect to its impact in policy and politics. Why don't you tell us about those views?
Yeah, I think that religion has a, obviously role to play in society. It obviously gives a lot of people meaning. But yeah, these sort of cluster of what's called the pro-life position, which is obviously a way to classify it that makes it sound sympathetic. But I don't think people have a right to tell other people when they can have abortions or not. I agree with you on the euthanasia and the right to die. I think that this is such a fundamental right, the right to live or die. It's the flip side of the right to live, right? It's like if someone could force you to live against your will indefinitely, that is a huge restriction on liberty. It causes, pain and degradation. They call it dignity. They say that they're defending the dignity of life, but there's nothing dignified about what happens to people often at the end of their lives. And they're not give people the choice in this intimate area of life, like the area of reproductive health. I think it's just terrible. And so, yeah, I think these are the main direct influences of religion on American life. It has some indirect effects that are sort of hard. Sometimes they come down on the side of liberty. So a lot of people argued against mask mandates in school, for example, on the grounds that there was a religious freedom violation. Now, I don't know if that's like in Christianity. It's sort of a little bit of a stretch. But there's generally, there's this general tendency to use religion as sort of resistance to what the government is doing to you. And then when the government is doing tyrannical things, that makes sense and can be a benefit for society.
Yeah, it's, it does cut both ways. Think of the solidarity movement in Poland in the late Cold War. Kids like you probably weren't even in diapers at the point, but it was very Catholic, right? And a certain reactionary variety of Catholicism. Nonetheless, it provided the moral focus for the people to push back against Marxist-Leninism, and was probably one of the principal things that led to the fall of the Soviet Union. On the other hand, its influence, I would argue, in the Republican Party today is becoming quite excessive.
Yeah. I think it's always been there. I mean, I don't know if it's being more excessive or less excessive. I mean, the evangelicals, Trump doesn't care about abortion, and he makes this clear time and time again. But yeah, I mean, there is this movement within conservatism that a lot of it's been sort of directed towards Trump worship. I mean, there are these, I don't know if you've read about the new Apostle Reformation, I think it's called, Apostolistic or something like that. But basically these people who are self-declared prophets who declare Trump basically, their leader sent by God. And so a lot of the religious stuff has been sublimated into the Trump cult. I mean, these people seem to worship Trump first and foremost more than anything. That seems to be the impact of religion on the Republican Party today.
Yeah, it's pretty hilarious. Here's a multi-adulterer, multi-this and that, cheater, liar, scumbag, bully, and they think he was sent by God. In fact, I posted one of my favorite memes of the year recently on Twitter. And did I put it on Twitter? I know I did on Facebook and a mailing list. And it shows God and the devil having a drink at a bar. And God is saying, that's hilarious, Luke, as he calls him, for Lucifer, that you took a lion, no good son of a bitch, blah, 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 and managed to convince everybody that I sent him. And Lucifer says, oh, God, you're making me blush. I thought that put the finger on it quite well. The idea that Trump was sent by God, what a concept. Another thing you've talked about is that the Republicans have become, very differently than it was in the past, the party of low human capital. Could you explain what you mean by that?
Yeah, the elite human capital concept is one that's easily misunderstood. So it's not just there are intelligent, educated people, there are unintelligent. That's part of it. There is a movement where Democrats are winning more of the college-educated, while Republicans are winning more of the uneducated. But there is like an idea of human capital as I see as the natural elite within developed society. So if you look at Russia, it's a conservative society. It's a society in many ways pro-Putin. But the biggest resistance to Putin is basically young urban people, the most educated members of society, right? Same thing with the government of Iran. There is a tendency to form for elite human capital to reject sort of conservatism in the small c sense, right? Just like the small-minded nationalism, religious fundamentalism. And these are the people that naturally tend to populate universities, media institutions. Not that these institutions don't have flaws, but they are fundamentally truth-seeking institutions. And the media, makes a lot of mistakes, but they do report to us what is going on in the world. And academia, for all its problems, does produce a lot of scientific and technological innovation. And so these people they're not always liberal, but they are idealistic. They are usually not small c conservative, but they can be more libertarian leaning. They can be more classical liberal. And these are the people that basically they used to be a little bit more evenly distributed between the Republicans and Democrats 10 or 20 years ago. They've gone completely in the direction of the Democrats. And this is primarily a Trump issue. Trump is such a magnet for low human capital and such a, repulsive figure to elite human capital just because he lies all the time. He doesn't respect his opponents. He's just got this demeanor and this way of interacting public life, openly, corrupt and self-interested and venal. And this is what's happened. And so everything about the Republican Party now more and more reflects that they're a low human capital party. So the rise of conspiratorial thinking on the right. Conspiracy theories are something that low human capital are into. The people who are less educated, people who either don't have the tools or don't have the concern with finding truth. You see these accounts with 500,000 or millions of followers on Twitter. I've looked for the left-wing equivalent. There are some left-wing fake news accounts, but they don't get nearly as big, and they don't have mainstream interaction. with figures like in Congress, like the right-wing conspiracy theorists have with people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, like, InfoWars now, Alex Jones, is considered just like somebody who J.D. Vance has praised. You look at the way Tucker has gone in the last year or two. And so, this is the rise of this sort of conspiratorial worldview, the rise of this just lack of concern for truth, the lack of concern really with ethics. Just not caring at all that Trump lies all the time and that he, doesn't believe in democracy. These are all low human capital traits, and it's increasingly separating the two parties.
It's also, I suspect, strongly related to the increased polarization, I would argue, towards religion. As Voltaire famously said, if they can make you believe absurdities, they can make you commit atrocities, which I always thought was a great quote. And while the party of stupid hasn't yet committed atrocities, it wouldn't surprise me if they get to that at some point.
Yeah, they want to. I think the sort of the hopes for the mass deportation. I think there are some things that if they could pull off. Trump openly talks about jailing his political opponents, so we're not that far off from that.
All right, so now why don't we turn the corner and show our whole cards? Now, with these all these negatives and some positives, where do you actually come out?
So because I agree with the Republicans on most things, I want Republicans to win most elections. That is, to me, it's an easy decision who I want to control the Senate and the House and the state governments, right? Except there's a few cases where I think people are particularly egregious. Like I think Josh Hawley is somebody who I wouldn't support if I lived in Missouri. He's probably going to win. Ted Cruz, I think, is too conspiratorial. If Ted Cruz could somehow lose and Republicans could hold the Senate, that would be good. But I usually want Republicans to win outside of those exceptions. And I overall had a sort of semi-endorsement for Trump called, hating modern conservatism while voting Republican. And, the idea is they're going to put the people in the courts and the administrative agencies that are going to generally do the things that I want to be done. Right. And that is acknowledging every bad thing we said about Republicans and about Trump in particular. In the end, I'm still a small government guy who believes that economic growth and technological progress is the most important thing. And especially, I think, with the influence of Elon Musk and, sort of these tech guys, the influence on the right, I think that's the Republican Party. So I still have to go with Trump, although it pains me. I'm filling out my ballot here in California. I have it. I posted on Twitter today that physically it's hard for me to pencil in Trump. So I still haven't done it yet. I filled out the entire ballot as of right now, except for the presidential race. And I'll probably force myself to do it at some point, but it's difficult.
Yeah. And we listed the double hater list that I have, and they're pretty strong. These are things I believe in pretty strongly and that lead me to hate both parties. And in fact, regular listeners know I got involved with the No Labels movement in the hope of crystallizing a third centrist, sane alternative. It sputtered for various reasons, but we may be able to revive it. We shall see. But at the end of the day, I have to say that I will almost certainly vote for Harris on the grounds of the ugly, nasty culture of the Republicans that we talked about, the party of stupid, and particularly the nature of Donald Trump. You're hiring a person to do a job. And as I said earlier, I would not hire someone, if he was his real honest self in an interview, I would not hire him to run my mailroom of 8 people in one of my companies. So why would I hire a dishonest, mean-spirited, probably at this point mentally diminished character for the most important job in the world? In terms of specific issues, I do agree with you that I do certainly trust the Republicans to do a better job on attempting to restrain the bureaucratic state. So I really am annoyed that Republicans couldn't have nominated someone like DeSantis. I would have voted for DeSantis with some level of enthusiasm. But on the other hand, this other stuff, I think, pushes the other way. And then 2 specific issues that I think are probably the 2 biggest issues that will impact the next 4 years. One is Ukraine. I do not trust Trump and Vance with respect to Ukraine. God knows what kind of deal Trump will try to cut with Putin to, show that I got the war finished in one day. Yeah. And, he's a wheeler dealer. He might actually do it, but what the hell is he going to give away? And then climate. Well, at the end of the day, both parties are wrong. I think I would prefer a little bit too aggressive attack on climate and utterly unacceptable, immoral, genocidal to say that climate is a hoax and that we should do nothing about it. So I also have not voted yet. We have early voting in Virginia, and my wife and I were talking about it. We'll probably hold off to actually voting in person on election day, kind of a fun thing to do. We haven't done it in a while. And so I still have a little window open to be convinced. And one of the reasons I did these conversations, which I think 3 out of 4 will come down on the side of Trump, is because maybe they'll convince me. But if I had to vote today, there is no doubt that when I add everything up, including the culture issues in particular, probably have to vote for Harris.
Yeah, I respect that. I mean, I understand sort of Trump having this guy leading the country it's just bad. I mean, it's aesthetically bad. It's morally bad. It's spiritually bad. I mean, he is such a flawed human being. You cannot stress it enough. I mean, you really cannot. And people say, there's Trump derangement syndrome. I mean, no, an objective recounting of like this man's flaws will reveal him to be by far the worst person in public life. I just think people have to be completely blind. Not to say it's not derangement. I mean, I think the objective truth about what Trump is just clear. I mean, I'll say that, the defending my position, which I'm not that passionate about because I just see your argument so clearly, and I really understand it, is that most of the work of the government is not done by the president. He's going to appoint, probably hundreds of judges, the next president, maybe a few Supreme Court justices who are going to be there for life. He's going to appoint thousands of people to government positions. Trump is not going to know what they're doing 99.9% of the time. And so, it's still the same case for DeSantis and Trump. You say you would enthusiastically support DeSantis. 99% of people they employ, probably 90% maybe of people they hire will probably, be doing relatively similar things. Now, there's a few things on Trump where he want to prosecute his opponents and such. I can imagine him having more toadies that are, more loyal toadies, as, using loyalty as a criterion for government appointment in a way that DeSantis would not, at least not in the same way. But basically, they'll appoint the exact same judges, and they're going to appoint most of the same kind of government officials. And then on Ukraine, I mean, Trump has always in his heart, I think, been pro-Putin, but he did not act like that in the first administration. He still brags about it, too, about giving, being the ones to give lethal aid to Ukraine while Obama wouldn't. They brought some countries, they brought North Macedonia, I think, into NATO. The Republicans always push for high levels of military spending. What they're going to do on Ukraine, I really don't know. But he appointed Bolton and Pompeo. I mean, who's Trump going to appoint this time? He could wake up and he could just listen to Vance and he could, try to sell out Ukraine. I don't think that's impossible. But at the same time, we could just see him behaving like he did in the first term, which was not taking an anti-Ukraine position. So yeah, that's at least up in the air. I don't think that, necessarily, even though he likes Putin in his heart, I don't think that will necessarily be reflected in policy.
You mentioned John Bolton, who is, a very solid defense-oriented thinker and writer and had senior position in the Trump administration. He has come out excoriating Trump and that he would never vote for Trump and that he is not trustworthy on issues like Ukraine and Taiwan. This was a guy who was sitting right there in the National Security Council and saw Trump up close and personal for a few years. So I think I might put a little bit more weight on Bolton's views on him than some commentariat like you or I who are looking at it from a distance.
Yeah, I think what was the number? Like 43 out of 46 or something, 40 out of 43 of people who served under him are not supporting Trump.
Against him.
What an amazing record. I mean, that is just incredible.
I know somebody that knows Steve. I know somebody who knows Steve Bannon and reasonably well. And Bannon confessed to him privately that, in his opinion, Trump is dumb as a bag of hammers and that it's all just showbiz and shtick. I don't know if that's true or not, but it's certainly possible. And the other thing you mentioned is the henchman issue. This is another of my major concerns. Last time, he made the mistake from his perspective of surrounding himself with adults, the Mattises and the Kellys and Tillerson, et cetera. Even Jeff Sessions, an honorable guy, as it turned out. And he learned his lesson that he can't be Trump if he has honorable people as his associates. So I suspect we're going to see people like Stephen Miller have big roles in the coming administration. And while I am not of the Trump derangement syndrome type that think that Trump's the second coming of Hitler, in fact, my model of Trump is it's all about the narcissism, and he doesn't actually have any strong beliefs, but he has got himself a audience of low information, low human capital people, and he will perform to get their accolades. That if you use that lens, you're almost always right about what Trump will do. On the other hand, this new cadre of Trump disciples, some of them are pretty smart. Vance, very smart and talented guy. And there's several other ones, some people that wrote the 2025 agenda document, some quite accomplished, quite smart people. And so I do not believe January 6th was a coup attempt, other than the minds of a few retarded 3%ers and Proud Boys. But we do have to put a lot of negative on Trump for not taking any action for 2 or 3 hours to call off these people, and fortuitously, probably from his
it was before the January 6th. It was the fake electors plot. I mean, it was the pressuring Mike Pence. So I think that's when I say coup, I would say it's a coup, but it has to be that January 6th is just the part of it, right? It's everything he was doing.
Yeah, I will say everything after December 14th, his behavior after December 14th was when the Electoral College voted. Everything after that, I think, is essentially disqualifying for him for elected office. Unprecedented in American history. We've never had anybody. And his own advisors, his own attorney general, told him there was no merit to the case. And yet, to this day, he maintains, I was wrong. And you said, I probably won 45 states in 2020. I mean, he's just deranged, etc. You want that guy?
Yeah, it's not. I mean, it's an argument, and it's a good argument. I'm not going to give you anything, say anything against it for Trump personally. Now, I don't think he's going to be able to pull it off again. I will say that. I mean, we might want to punish him, but we also might want to think about, the concern might be he might try to do it again. And I think he couldn't do it when he was in office, right? So he's going to try to, if he loses in 2024 in the next couple of weeks, he's going to say it's all fake. He's probably going to push his lawsuits. It didn't succeed in 2020. Politico magazine has a very long and detailed story of how he could try to actually overthrow the results of the election. And he has to do a lot. I mean, there's a lot of sort of guardrails there. And some of them have been put in by Congress and signed by Biden in the years since to sort of fortify the election. Yeah, it's going to be difficult to do it again. I don't think he stays in 2028. I mean, I think that, he's so old by then anyway. And there's this hard constitutional rule that says you can't serve more than 2 terms. I don't think somebody brought up in one of my articles, someone in the replies brought up a possibility that he throws out. He tries to stage a coup for his preferred candidate in 2028. I don't think Trump takes risks for another person. He just doesn't care enough to do that. And yeah, he's going to try to persecute his enemies. I mean, he's going to try. It's unfortunate. It's bad. The Republican voters are bad for selecting this guy. It is what it is at this point.
I'm with you that I think his chances of being able to overturn the 2024 elections about Zippo. It's kind of like Pearl Harbor. You can get away with it once, or 9/11, you can get away with it once, but trying to get away with it twice, the Dems will be well prepared. And not just the Dems, but the institutionalist Republicans. There's no chance. Unfortunately, at least from my perspective, I officially announced yesterday or the day before, I don't forget which, that I believe Trump's going to win. I've been looking at the data. And in fact, I just submitted a article to Politico, which lays out a very detailed analysis of the wasted vote phenomenon on the Democratic side. The Democrats have a huge issue in that in 2020, they won California by 2 million votes. They won New York by 5 million votes. California, they won by 5 million. New York, 2 million, and several states by 1 million, including Massachusetts, Maryland, Illinois, and maybe one other. The biggest number of wasted votes in the Republicans was actually in Tennessee, surprisingly enough, 704,000. And I've done a whole bunch of simulation, and I take the view that unless Harris wins by 3.25% of the popular vote or more, she's not likely to win the election. And she's currently running in the Real Clear Politics consensus poll at about 1%. And I would just also say that the zeitgeist and the vibe seems to be going in Trump's direction. Harris has not shown herself to be a strong leader. Vapid. Waltz, nice guy, but again, is he a serious guy? Is he a high human capital guy? I'd say no. And so I think a fair number of the low information voters are just pattern matching. We got kind of vapid and kind of midland kind of talent over here, and he's an asshole, but he's a talent on this side, right? He'll be my bully. And so I went on the record and said I'm now accepting bets at even money for Trump, which hitherto I have not. So I don't think the issue is him trying to overturn 2024 elections, but what he and his henchmen will do when they get into power.
Yeah, it's, the prediction markets are giving Trump about a 60%, 55-60. It was 50-50, close to 50 for a while. So someone take it at even odds, they can get better odds. They can go to the prediction market if they believe in Kamala and pay 40 cents on a dollar.
Yeah, I always like an overlay. I never bet on an honest bet. I always want an overlay.
You just want to, yeah.
And so last time I won thousands of dollars on the 2024 election. Even amazing the number of retards that gave me $1,000 bets that Trump would win in 2020. And he actually came closer than I thought he would.
Yeah, very close, yeah.
But nonetheless, I won thousands of dollars. So anyone that wants to try to take my money back, hit me up.
Yeah, I think that's. I think the market is probably close to correct. Like, who knows? I mean, I just posted this thing from the New York Times where if the polls are off like they are in 2020, Trump takes every swing state. If they're off like they were in 2022, Kamala takes every swing state except Georgia. So it can be. You just need 2 points in either direction. This thing can be a blowout in terms of electoral college in either direction. So we just don't know. I never had an election in my lifetime where I felt less certain of what was going to happen. I mean, I was wrong in 2016. Most of us thought Trump was going to lose, but we still had confidence that there was a clear favorite. 2020, I thought Biden would win. Most people thought Biden would win, but Trump came close. This one, I just not surprised either way. I mean, it could be, it could be either direction, and it could be sizable in either direction. I just don't know.
In essence, it was a coin flip. Wouldn't shock me by any means if Kamala won, but at this point, there's enough signal for me to say, I'll take bets on the other side. So what do you think happens to our country under a Trump administration?
The U.S. has been doing great economically. There's just a big economist feature on the U.S. And just the last 20 years, really, our recovery from COVID and our recovery from the financial crisis, we've done much better than all developed countries. I think that would continue under a Trump presidency. Some people think that, it'll be like 2016, and they wonder about the cultural effect. So really wokeness took off after Trump won, and many people believe, and I'm with them, that Trump had a role to play in that. Just the backlash to this guy was so extreme that it turned the country in that direction. I don't think that happens twice. I think that, maybe I'll write about this, but I think that the way political trends work is like things get old, like there just is a trendiness, and you can't just keep screeching about the same thing for 10 years. Trump came, down the escalator in 2015. He was running for president. 2016, he won. Now we're all the way in 2024. I don't think you keep that energy for a decade. Like people were still thinking about Trump was still at the center of our news, even when he wasn't president. And so maybe this is wishful thinking, and maybe I might not write an article on this. I think that there is going to be a kind of a detachment from politics. We've gone through eras, when there's been less interest in politics culturally and when there's been more interest. I think that the 1990s, for example, was the culture was really depoliticized even into the 2000s. Then that changed around 2010, 2012. I think we are going back to a place where politics is sort of boring. You have these micro niche communities of right-wing podcasters and left-wing women and left-wing sort of establishment institutions. But I think in the wider culture, there's just going to be, politics will be less. Politics will be a less part of our culture. It's not going to be like you tune into the Grammys. A couple of years ago, you tuned into the Grammys and it's all about politics, right? I think there's going to be a lot less of that. And when it does pop up, it'll be individual issues like abortion. This is probably what it was 20 or 30 years ago, where they'd be like, oh, something would catch on. Oh, sexual harassment is a major thing. This was like the early 1990s. We have to talk about sexual harassment. We have to talk about women's issues. So they pop up individually, but there's not this woke thing where it's like this matrix of like oppression. Oh, now we got to talk about blacks and women and LGBT all at the same time. And so I think that really in either direction, I think we're probably, I think if Trump wins, that's what happens. And if Kamala wins, I think the cultural forces are interesting because you're still going to have Elon Musk and you're still going to have Twitter. And I think the tech, sort of the, Nate Silver's book, he talks about the village versus the river, basically roughly referencing sort of the media and elites versus more Silicon Valley guys, although that's not exactly the distinction. But idea would be this dispute between like these techish, libertarian, conservative, elites and the federal government and the mainstream legacy media institutions in the Democratic Party. I think that becomes sort of the headline in our politics, personified through Elon Musk fighting the regulatory state, which is going to be trying to do stuff to him. And then he's going to be fighting back and using Twitter for that purpose and his status within the Republican Party and as a cultural figure. So that's actually going to be, I think, very interesting. That's actually the more interesting outcome. So I think check out, or we move into this new place, which is, but even that politics will be less important. I'm taking 2016 to 2020 as sort of the peak of political influence in our culture. I don't think we get back there.
Be interesting to see. Now, I agree with you that the 90s was a time when people disengaged from politics, but for good reason. The economy was good throughout the whole, from 92 onward. The Soviet Union and its allies had collapsed. The U.S. was the absolute hegemon of the world. There was a big peace dividend from cutting defense spending. We balanced the budget. Yeah, things were good, and you didn't need to worry too much about politics. But that's quite different than the way we are now, where we have a global near peer and may soon to be peer and maybe even soon to be post-peer adversary in China. We have a major land war in Europe to change boundaries, contra to the World War II post-war settlement, which said, thou shalt not change boundaries by force. We have, and both parties are so guilty on this, whistling past the graveyard. The debt burden continues to rise, continues to go up. And that, how long they can continue to spin the plates with fancy monetary tricks, I don't know. But at the end of the day, that one is going to eventually push the country into a deep corner. In fact, we're already at the point where the interest on our debt is only slightly less than the total receipts of individual income tax. Think about that in terms of a constraint. So I think I would disagree. It's possible that culturally it could happen, but I would disagree that it's anything like the 90s, where for good reason people didn't really give two shits about politics. Further back to the woke issue, I would say is one of the reasons I'm willing to roll the dice with the Dems, probably, in that I'm pretty closely involved with some of the woke stuff with respect to universities in particular. I've co-founded something called the MIT Free Speech Alliance, and I've been associated with the American Alumni Free Speech Alliance, et cetera. And I would say that the tide turned around 2021, and that and the other interesting thing is actually being out there and talking to people at the grassroots level in universities. The actual wokesters in universities was probably never more than 15 or 20%. But they seized the high ground and the controls through the HR process and in the administration, and they managed to intimidate another 45% or 50%. So you had a 65, 70% effective working supermajority for wokery in academia, but mostly via fear. And now that peak woke has crested, more and more people are saying, fuck them people, And I think that at some point we'll see a place where their effective fear plus core is below 50%, and then you may see an explosive decompression in wokery in universities, one I know best, but perhaps in media and the not-for-profit world as well. So that's one of the reasons, frankly, I'm more willing to take a risk with the Dems this time than otherwise. If we're still on the upswing of wokery, I'm not sure that I would.
Yeah, but politics matters too. I mean, the Democrats, when they get into positions of power, it's not just, if you're worried about the universities, it's not just the cultural impact. It's that a lot of the stuff comes directly from civil rights law. So a lot of the Title IX stuff that pushed, sort of these kangaroo courts of young men accused of sexual harassment or sexual assault in the early 2010s. That, as I show in my book, was caused pretty directly by the Obama administration. The Obama administration really put pressure on schools to do stuff like this, telling them to hire these Title IX coordinators and so forth. Even the process of, in the long run, universities collecting data on race and sex and having these sort of soft quotas Originally, that pressure came from the Nixon administration, and the universities eventually became, as crazy as we see today. So Republicans are going to be better on civil rights law. And so, the wokeness in the culture, it's hard to predict. I think that the wokeness in sort of universities is perhaps more important because it has an influence on, our freedom of speech, the scientific process, discovery, our ability to speak freely and learn new things about the world. Democrats are unquestionably worse on that. And so that's also something to consider.
Yeah, I think they are worse, but they're getting less worse, probably. And the Republicans are getting worse in that, attempting to, defund climate research, telling people what kind of research you can do with respect to research in reproductive technologies.
Well, I don't know. I haven't seen a lot of that.
Not a lot, but it's more than there was 10 years ago, 20 years ago, when Republicans were full on for science. But one of the things that's coming out of the polling data is quite interesting, which is young men are swinging towards Trump in a pretty major way. One poll actually showed that Trump might actually win a majority, bare majority, but a majority or a strong number in young men, while the young women have moved even further in the Democratic direction, but not nearly enough to make up for the young men moving in the other direction. Do you have any insights on what's going on as a cultural analyst and a political thinker that's producing this result? And first, do you believe it's true? And two, if you do, what do you think is causing it?
I think it's true to some extent. I haven't done enough research to what degree. I think that some of it, an underrated explanation that Matt Iglesias has brought up is the parties are just more polarized on issues, and men and women just disagree on many different issues. And so, as the parties become more polarized and Republicans are clearly identified with conservative positions and Democrats with liberal positions, you will get a gender gap. It doesn't have to be specifically anything related to sex. Except to the extent that policy areas are related to sex. There is that. And I also think, I think the abortion issue is important. I think I don't know if it's, women are indeed more pro-choice at this point, but it's an intensity of feeling that I think is very important, that I think influences sort of female identity as they approach the voting booth. I think that the rise of the internet has been a big thing. Like, males find male entertainment, like Rogan and like Andrew Tate, whatever you think of these people, they're often crazy. But they're the kind of entertainment that men are sort of into. And now there's this, big market for content directly targeted at men. And Trump is like trying to reach these podcasts, and these podcasts have huge audience, and they're not that political. They're not as, mobilized. They're not, young men are not going to vote as much as young women. It is there, and it does create a sort of vibe of young men being a little bit more conservative. I think, Elon Musk, there's a Wall Street Journal story on Elon Musk and how he's, they're coming out to see him in Pennsylvania. He's seen as a kind of masculine hero because of the things he's accomplished and his sort of dreams for humanity. And him throwing his lot in with Trump, I think, influences that too. And so, there is just these issues unrelated to sex, but there is sort of this rise of this bro culture, the rise of this sort of, attitudinal differences between the parties that probably goes most of the way explaining the gender gap.
All righty. Well, I want to thank Richard Hanania for coming on the Jim Rutt Show and having a very civil conversation, even though at the margin, at least, we probably disagree. But it sounded like on the big center, the meaty part, we probably mostly agreed.
We have a pretty similar outlook, Jim. I think our disagreements are relatively minor, even though we end up on different sides of the election. I mean, we're still,
we're Enlightenment guys, small L liberals, right? And,
exactly.
And actually try to think through the issues rather than just grab onto a team uniform. I'm team red, yeah. I'm team blue, blah, blah, blah. I hate that shit.
Yeah, likewise.
All righty. Well, thank you again. Wonderful conversation. Audio production and editing by Andrew Blevins Productions. Music by Tom Muller at modernspacemusic.com.